Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Inside the Cyber Battlefield, Iranian Cyber Operations from an FBI Perspective, hosted by the Program on Extremism here at the George Washington University. My name is Jennifer Baker, and I'm a Senior Research Fellow here at the program. As some of you may already know, our program released a report last year titled Propaganda, Procurement, and Lethal Operations, Iran's Activities Inside America. Our research documented how the Islamic Republic of Iran and its proxies operate well beyond the Middle East, embedding themselves inside the U.S. through assassination plots, procurement of sensitive technology, and propaganda networks that actively disseminate Tehran's worldview. One of the most important and rapidly growing disseminations of this activity is Iran's cyber operations. Our report details how the Islamic Republic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the Ministry of Intelligence have developed sophisticated cyber capabilities to target U.S. critical infrastructure, companies, and government entities. Our research made clear that cyber threats are a central component of Iran's hostile posture toward the U.S., intersecting with influence campaigns, illicit procurement, and even lethal plotting. That is why we're especially fortunate today to have with us Brett Leatherman, who is the Assistant Director of the FBI's Cyber Division, for such a timely conversation. Under his leadership, the Cyber Division plays a pivotal role in detecting, disrupting, and imposing costs on nation-state cyber adversaries like Iran. But before turning it over to A.D. Leatherman, I'd like to tell you a little bit about his background. As some of you may already be aware, under Presidential Policy Directive 41, the FBI is the lead cyber threat response agency for the U.S. government. And in this role, A.D. Leatherman serves as the senior executive managing the FBI strategy to impose costs on some of the most sophisticated cyber adversaries targeting U.S. interests. Prior to this position, he held several key leadership roles within the Cyber Division and also the Dallas Division. A.D. Leatherman entered on duty as an FBI special agent in 2003. He first served in the Cleveland and Detroit field offices while also serving as an FBI pilot and hostage negotiator. He graduated from Cornerstone University with a degree in computer information systems, and he received a master's degree in cybersecurity risk management from Georgetown University. A.D. Leatherman holds several widely recognized cyber certifications, and he speaks domestically and internationally on emerging national security and cyber threats. It is my complete honor to have A.D. Leatherman here today. He is an extremely busy person going from meeting to meeting, and we're so lucky to have him here. And first and foremost, A.D. Leatherman, thank you for everything that you do and your team does to protect, our national security. Can't thank you enough. Just a quick note to our audience. We'll have a little bit of time for some questions and answer session. So I would ask that you think of your questions and put them in the Q&A box, and A.D. Leatherman will address them as we go. And from there, I'm going to turn the floor over to A.D. Leatherman. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. Can you guys hear me okay, Jennifer?
Yes,
Okay,
perfect.
awesome. Well, thank you. I want to thank both Jennifer and the GW program on extremism for allowing us, the FBI Cyber Division, to address the group here. The topic today is incredibly important to us and to the country and to our collective national security. Just today, and I'm going to stray just off script just a little bit, we released a joint cybersecurity advisory, the FBI, CISA, and about over 15 different agencies across the globe, providing network defense capabilities and intelligence for defenders to defend against the Salt Typhoon compromises, which that is a PRC-based cyber espionage group. And I think what that shows is all nation states are leveraging cyber operations to collect key intelligence, to conduct cyber attacks, to steal intellectual property, to pre-position on global infrastructure in support of their own objectives, their country's objectives. So cyber is increasingly becoming a core tenet and a core mission within foreign military and intelligence apparatus. The intelligence that we released today identified that there are several companies that support the Chinese Communist Party in their targeting of the U.S. telecoms and global telecom sector. And to that end, the Iranians, the Russians, the North Koreans, they all use companies now to support their hacking operations. And that is incredibly important to all of us in understanding the malicious nature, those malicious partnerships, so that we can develop key partnerships with academia, industry, critical infrastructure, international partners to combat this threat. We've done that successfully over the last few years as we've combated the cyber threat posed by the Iranian regime. The FBI, I think, to understand our work in this space and kind of where I'm coming from as the head of FBI Cyber Operations, the FBI's role, as Jennifer mentioned, under Presidential Policy Directive 41, is to impose cost on malicious cyber actors, as well as to provide significant assistance to victims. When we talk about imposing cost, we are both a member of the United States intelligence community as well as a member of the law enforcement community. So the FBI enjoys unique authorities under Title 18, Title 10, 50. We work with partners who have those capabilities, and we're also assigned authorities under Executive Order 12333, which allows the FBI to actually engage in not only network defense or defensive operations, but to actually take the fight to the bad actors. And that is incredibly important to us. As a victim-centric organization, our goal is to launch enforcement action, whether that is indictments or charges against individuals themselves, and an effort to bring them to the United States to face justice for their hacking activity, or to use enforcement action to conduct technical operations to disrupt the actors from their continued targeting of the United States. Iran is a prime example of that. How does Iran target the U.S. using cyber operations? This, from my perspective, there are several categories. Number one, they do it for cyber espionage purposes, similar to what I talked to with Salt Typhoon. The Iranians' goal is to engage in hacking operations against the U.S. intelligence community, government agencies, and even U.S. corporations and dissidents to understand the intelligence picture about how the United States and our allies position ourselves to defend against them, whether it's their military, their proxies, or otherwise, Hezbollah, Hamas, or otherwise. So espionage is a core area. Pre-placement of capability on critical infrastructure is another area. We've seen that with the Iranian actors recently, and pre-placing capability to actually manipulate critical infrastructure. So if you're thinking about the energy sector or water distribution sector, nuclear energy, financial sector, the Iranians want to control the valves and the things that actually turn electricity on and off for populations, so that if there is some sort of greater conflict with the United States geopolitically, it allows them to insert chaos into the United States in order to distract, in part, what we're doing to respond to their global aggression. So we've got cyber espionage, pre-positioning, then there's cyber network attacks, which are destructive attacks against U.S. systems, data, and infrastructure. We've not yet seen a significant destructive attack launched against the United States by the government of Iran. That tends to be a red line. If you start to use cyber weapons to destroy infrastructure, you're now destroying, information in a sovereign nation state that could, depending on what it is, represent an act of war. And so there tends to be a little bit more judicious use of those kinds of capabilities. And then we also see the Iranians use cyber in support of influence operations. There's no greater example of that recently than the 2024 presidential election. During the 2024 election cycle, late summer, early fall, the FBI identified hack and leak operations being conducted by the Iranians against the Trump campaign in an effort to steal sensitive documents from the campaign and then to release them to the competitive party in order to inform or tip the scale where they could when it came to the elections. This is not unique to Iran. We've seen other nation states do the same thing. But this is the first time that Iran was caught and publicly scrutinized by the intelligence community for that action. We put out a public statement shortly after we saw what was happening. We had actually seen them hack both campaigns initially, and so we put a public statement out saying they're targeting both the Democratic and the Republican ticket. And then as we continued to investigate the case, we identified that it was actually a hack and leak in order to tip the scales, like I said. So we wanted to ensure that the American public understood before the elections what was happening in order to remove the influence that the Iranians were trying to project into our democratic processes. That's incredibly important because nation states leverage, our online social media platforms. They leverage our ability to engage in free and open discourse in order to insert their perspectives and try to again influence policy here in the United States and even elections. So influence operations is an incredibly important part of what we do. In combating that, not only did we put statements out that helped the general public understand what was happening, we also attributed this activity to 3 actors and then publicly indicted them for engaging in this behavior. That attribution is incredibly important so that the world knows these 3 people who are affiliated with the government of Iran were involved in this activity. And it should also serve as a deterrent for anybody else who sits within the Iranian government or is in any way related to the Iranian government. It should demonstrate to them the United States' power to conduct attribution in the case of cyber events, and that when we conduct that attribution, we are going to leverage all resources to pursue the arrest or any enforcement opportunities against those actors. Will we ever get them into custody? Probably not at this point. They know that they're wanted by the United States, but listen, at this point, what are their options when it comes to vacation? Right? They can't travel anywhere other than Tehran, Pyongyang, Moscow, or a few select other places around the globe who won't extradite these actors back to the United States. To me, those don't seem like prime vacation spots, especially when you're an individual who likes to vacation in Europe or the United States or elsewhere. You've lost that opportunity. And others around you who engage in similar hacking operations see that. So deterrence is incredibly important for us. When I talk to the public sector, when it comes to network defense, I talk about deterrence in 2 ways. Deterrence through offense, which is what we do, U.S. Cyber Command does, our international partners do, and I think we do it pretty well. We engage in offensive operations to deter the actors from continuing this kind of behavior. And there's deterrence through defense, which we need to do better, and that involves all of us doing a better job at increasing resilience in our information technology and our systems and our hardware and our software to prevent the Iranians from getting a foothold in those environments. Because as soon as they get a foothold in U.S. infrastructure, they can now pivot into other U.S. victims. It's incredibly important to realize that the Iranians don't use infrastructure sitting in Iran generally to target the United States, whether it's the United States military, whether it's diplomatic, the State Department, whether it's the Justice Department, or whether it's hospitals that they have historically targeted as well. It's very difficult to use internet space in Iran to do that. They've got to leverage internet space that is trusted across the global networks, and often the United States internet space is just that. And so we've got to defend that space and prevent them from using that to target other U.S. equities. So that is part of our mission, is not only to impose cost from an offensive standpoint, but to take what we learn in conducting offensive work and to apply it to the defensive side. We have to release intelligence that we learn from our law enforcement operations to industry, to critical infrastructure, to help them learn how to defend what they do, or what they should be defending, to defend what's important to them. And so we don't always get that right, but we try often to get that information out incredibly quickly so that we can defend against those actors. The Iranians, much like other countries, use cyber operations as a tool of national power. And what I also often say is cyber is something that a relatively small, a relatively non-technical nation state can use in its warfare arsenal in an asymmetric way to impose cost on us as well. It is disproportionate in its use. If you can't use your military to hurt us, you can often use cyber weapons to hurt us. And that is incredibly important for folks to understand that it is scalable in ways that other efforts are not. And we've seen that when the Iranians have targeted hospitals, for example. A few years back, they targeted a cancer research hospital for children. And that was an incredibly disgusting attack that we saw targeting the hospital. And ultimately, it was freelance cyber operators working out of Iran, trying to monetize their activity, trying to get money for engaging in malicious cyber operations. The FBI was able to identify that and alert the hospital early. They were able to defend their infrastructure as a result of that. But that shows that the Iranian government has no real boundaries when it comes to cyber operations when it looks to steer that political discourse or circumvent sanctions in a way that brings money into Iran that otherwise would not come into Iran. So that is important as well. I see a question that says, do you consider the destructive attack against Sands Casino as a destructive state-sponsored computer network attack? So without getting into the national security side of that, that was a destructive attack launched against a US-based organization by a nation state that had destructive capability. So yes, I view that in the lens of what we call CNA or cyber network attacks, but some of the intelligence that we have that informs political decisions kind of changes or mitigates the discourse as far as how we attribute that directly back to the regime, or like I talked about earlier, where there may be individuals acting outside the regime's control to engage in these kind of attacks. But we always look at that attribution, especially in the case of CNA, to understand, is this a shift in the way the state actors are targeting the U.S.? A destructive attack like the Sands casino attack is significant when it is state directed, as opposed to individuals acting outside, what the state might direct as well. And I'll just pause here a minute to say you're welcome to throw questions up in that box, and I'm happy to answer them throughout the discussion or at the end as well. So where we get particularly concerned then is where nation states start to work with each other to conduct cyber operations. We often don't see nation states use the best of the best cyber technology when they work together, meaning they don't typically share their tools. They typically don't share their tactics. They don't typically share their infrastructure, but often they have certain objectives that are to them conjoined with the other country's objectives. And there are opportunities to engage in cyber operations. There are opportunities to share some subsets of tools in order to expand their operations. The Iranians look very closely to the Russians when conducting this kind of work because there are similar objectives. The Iranians have provided support to the Russians, we know publicly, in the war in Ukraine related to the support of drones and other things. And they've also provided support as it relates to cyber tools, techniques, tactics, as well as capabilities. So when we see nation states start to work together, we understand that there's something there that one country is looking to expand or scale in ways that should be concerning to all of us. And certainly Ukraine has been an area where that has been the case. But what we do often in the FBI is we pair our visibility with that of our international partners. So the Five Eye community, which is the UK, the United States, the Canadians, New Zealand, and Australia, we are, I would say, top cyber actors across the global ecosystem, and we have to share the unique insight that we have with each other as to how the Iranians are pivoting their operations. The way the Iranians operate in the United Kingdom, for example, is different than the way the Iranians are targeting the United States. Sometimes the UK sees malicious tools that are novel before we get to see those. But the UK recognizes the importance of sharing that with us so that we can, number one, defend our own equities, but number two, help the UK, our partners, better understand and respond to that threat as well. And so the partnerships that we have developed is both intelligence agency with MI5, MI6, GCHQ, with the Israelis. If you look at our relationships with Canada and CSIS and some of their intelligence services, has created a border agnostic threat picture that allows us to pivot against the threat in very compelling ways. Those are incredibly important relationships that we have to maintain because, as we know, the Iranians target the West in general, and the quicker we can see specific indicators of an attack, the quicker we can see how they're leveraging different tactics, the better we are at defending that. Okay, a question says, do you feel like generally espionage motivated actors are collaborating rather than competing? There's public reports on Russia hacking Iranian actors. There is no love lost between enemies, right? Or friends in some cases when it comes to the Russians and the Iranians. And yes, we have seen opportunities that the Russians have taken to target China, for example. And recently, China and the Russians have really aligned as it relates to Ukraine, in part because China is looking at how the West responds each year that the war goes on in Ukraine to understand how we might respond to some sort of invasion in Taiwan. Likewise, the Iranians are also of the opinion that they are friends with Russia, friends with China when they need to be, but there's also compelling things they need from the Russians or the PRC that will sometimes lead them to conduct hacking operations against each other. What we've seen as well before is the Iranians or the Russians use each other's infrastructure in order to conduct attacks against the United States, not with the other country's permission, but in order to hide or obfuscate that activity to the United States, meaning the Iranians hope that we'll attribute it to the Russians, when in reality it's the Iranians that are conducting those hacking operations. So this is a complex space, and what we do know is that the nature of this being border agnostic requires that we move quickly, that we have authorities that allow us to be nimble in how we move against the actors in order to conduct that attribution. Is the FBI using AI cybersecurity defense to be more proactive instead of being reactive? Can the FBI proactively engage in notifying companies that they have been targeted to a cyber attack? So on the first part of that question, we are not doing good enough when it comes to reactive cybersecurity, meaning we're not using AI in ways that we should be. Now, my team's job in cyber division is to take the fight to the bad actors. My team's job is to provide assistance to victims. It's not necessarily to defend the FBI systems. The intelligence we get goes into defending the FBI systems, but we have network defenders who do that. And I do know that they're trying to leverage AI in much more meaningful ways to better defend our networks. When it comes to defending the homeland, we are looking really hard at ways to leverage AI. And what I tell my teams is we're sprinting before we walk at this point because we've got to get there. The adversaries are making effective use of artificial intelligence to scale their operations, and we have to do the same. It's incredibly important that we invest in that technology. We do have really good relationships with the artificial intelligence providers, and I'm hopeful we'll get there really soon. But when it comes to us proactively engaging in notifying companies that they have been targeted, yes, that is often the case with the nation state threat. Is a company doesn't always identify that those threat actors are targeting them. We don't normally get a call from a company that says, I've been targeted by the IRGC, or I've been targeted by the MOIS, or Iranian actors in general. What we do is we see it in our collection. NSA sees it in their collection. Our foreign partners see it in their collection. And what we do is we take that, we identify who the potential victim is behind those attacks, And we go notify those victims that they are either being targeted by Iranian actors or they have been compromised in some cases by Iranian actors. And then after we notify them, we help them conduct hunt efforts within their environment to understand where those actors may be and what their objectives might be in the environment. Again, it could be pre-placement of capability. It could be intellectual property theft. It could be traditional espionage. But intent is incredibly important to understanding where they are in the environment and where they might go in the environment. As far as the question on how do we see adversaries' use of AI? Let me give you an example. This is I do not think that the Iranians yet are using artificial intelligence in the ways that the PRC or the Russians are. So the example I'll give you is from last year. The FBI conducted an operation against an online artificial intelligence platform known as Meliorator. That was a Russian-based platform that was conducting influence operations at scale related to the war in Ukraine. That was generative AI that allowed the Russians to create very realistic social media accounts to circumvent social media provider safeguards, and then to identify people to follow or to try to get to follow that account, who they could then start to influence in ways that were beneficial to the regime there in Russia. Now, they were able to scale that in ways they couldn't in prior periods. Think about some of the 2016 elections where the Internet Research Agency operating in Russia scaled influence operations against the United States and our elections. When that happened, they leveraged thousands of people, contractors at the Internet Research Agency, who were spending tremendous time, millions of dollars, to conduct global influence operations. Now, in the latest case with Meliorator, they were able to do that not with thousands of people, but with thousands of bots that were able to do it on their own, and to morph both the messages and the responses to other messages and how they amplified other bots' messages in ways that circumvented some of the best safeguards that our social media providers had put in place. That should serve as kind of a cautionary tale for us about where artificial intelligence may go. We're moving beyond this space where AI can simply be used to create very well worded social engineering or spear phishing emails. We're moving to an area now where it's actually allowing state actors to scale their operations. We're moving to a place where ransomware actors, even those operating out of Iran, can scale their work in ways that they couldn't before. Instead of having an entire criminal ecosystem supporting you in the ransomware space, you have a very compelling artificial intelligence platform that now looks automatically for vulnerabilities in victims' networks and points out where those are and what tool sets you can use to exploit those. Artificial intelligence is starting to inform, malicious cyber operators about how they can better target victims here and abroad. So, this is going to be a space that we continue to look at closely in the FBI. I know that the United States intelligence community is doing that as well. But I think we're also in a space where artificial intelligence is not just increasing in sophistication and capability, it is increasing dramatically and very quickly in sophistication and capability. And that requires all of us to do the same so that we can leverage it in those defensive systems that we utilize to identify AI-based targeting of our networks. So artificial intelligence, I know, is something that is top of mind for the Iranians as well as the PRC and the Russians when conducting cyber operations. Another area that we have seen the Iranians use malicious cyber operations is intelligence gathering in support of lethal plotting. We all know that the Iranians are looking, in some cases, to kill dissidents who speak out against them, who are in Europe, in the United States, and abroad. We know that the Iranians are looking to get revenge on United States government officials who were involved in the airstrike against Qasem Soleimani. And so there is no better way to get a pattern of life in today's environment for an individual than cyber reconnaissance of that individual. Think about your own phone and what you do on your phone. What information would be available to an adversary who wants to know everything about you that they can? Well, obviously, communications that you have with your significant other, your family, your work colleagues, geolocation data that shows where you are, notifications from travel providers that show where you're going to be, and then historical geolocation data that shows habits. Where do you normally go? Is there anywhere you go on certain nights on a regular basis? Like that pattern of behavior that is collected by your devices, if it falls into the wrong hands, can be used towards some sort of lethal effect, right? And so that is a big concern for us. Is again, if you look at that, border agnostic threat we have, you no longer have to have somebody sitting here in the United States conducting surveillance in advance of some sort of lethal operation. You used to have that, and there was tremendous risk that you would be identified by FBI or other intelligence services or law enforcement. Now you don't have to worry about that because you get control of certain online accounts or facilities of a potential victim. And if you lose control, you just take time to look at opportunities to re-engage that person's technology. And what we've seen the Iranians do very proficiently is starting to exploit the technology of the family members or close associates of those individuals, because there's a lot of intelligence to be gathered if you can get on a significant other's cellular phone or email account or online account in order to learn more about the principal, or their children's information, or their executive assistant's account that really manages a lot of their travel. Those are points of vulnerability in industry as well as in government. And so the Iranians understand that, and that's where they place their targeting, is in those places, those individuals who are most vulnerable, but also who might have the most information about somebody. So that's an area that is, I think, disproportionately sits in the Iran bucket when it comes to lethal plotting, that we work very closely on here at the FBI. We address the Iran threat differently here than we do any other threat. I say that because the IRGC is a state sponsor of terror. They're a foreign terrorist organization. They're a foreign military, but they're also a state sponsor of terror and a foreign terrorist organization designated by the United States government. So what we've created here is the Iran Threat Mission Center. This is the only place we have a mission center in the FBI. And that mission center is meant to support the president's directive to exert maximum pressure on Iran. That maximum pressure transcends everything we do here in the FBI. And that's why we co-locate not just cyber division personnel who look at malicious cyber operations, but also counterterrorism personnel and counterintelligence personnel, because all three of those in tandem are used by the Iranian government to engage in all the things that we have talked about here today. And so, the assistant director of counterterrorism, Don, and I have regular conversations about how cyber operations are enabling potential acts of terrorism here in the homeland, against our troops overseas, or against our allies. Roman, who heads our counterintelligence division, and I have regular conversations about how cyber operations inform Iran's intelligence picture, or how it helps them steal U.S. innovation in intellectual property in order to better build their weapons systems or their artificial intelligence platforms or their quantum computers a lot better than what their scientists or their workforce will allow them to do. There's no doubt that America is the top country when it comes to innovation of new, emerging, and disruptive technologies. And as a result of that, the nation states want to steal that from us so that they can, number one, implement those kind of technologies in their own countries, but number two, compete with us in the global marketplace. And over time, the more intellectual property that is stolen from us, the increased liability it is to national security here. And increasingly, cyber operations directed against the West, there's not as many consequences. There's just not as much recourse for cyber operations as there would be if Iran sent, a submarine onto the U.S. shore to launch military action. There would be tremendous consequence for Iran if they did that. But when they conduct hacking operations, the response is much more measured. It often involves, technical operations or enforcement action by the FBI, or technical operations against, United States Cyber Command. That is kind of the extent of it right now. At some point, we're going to see, I believe, cyber tip into potential warfare, where you see cyber affect regional communities through the targeting of critical infrastructure, life safety implications, where you could actually have that threat to life and safety to local populations. Those are going to clearly be acts of war. I think the global community is starting to have those conversations about how we defend against that, or continue to defend against that, but what the response would look like to that. And a response to that would not simply be a cyber operation executed against the nation state. It would likely involve military action and or sanctions, economic actions, diplomatic actions as well. So we're likely moving to a place where cyber is not treated just like cyber, but we're going to start to see other aspects of national power that start to impact it as well. Question is, how has Iranian cyber activity shifted since the recent Israel-Hamas war? Yeah, that's a good question. When it comes to Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and others, like, we see Iran, because they're not as technical. Hamas is clearly not as technical as what the state of Iran is. But we see the state of Iran providing some level of support often to those terrorist organizations, whether it is providing them visibility into security movement by Israel or others through the cyber reconnaissance, or others. Like, that is their goal, is to provide some level of visibility. We have not seen post-Israel Hamas any significant cyber threat from Hamas, but we have tipped the Israelis to cyber operations being directed at responses to Gaza and other areas, to the Hamas actors themselves, and to better inform the regime about what Israel or the United States position is on that war. So there hasn't been a real shift in cyber operations. We haven't seen major destructive attacks launched against Israel, for example. We have seen some attempts. I think earlier last year, we released a joint cybersecurity advisory warning the global community that there was certain Israeli developed equipment in critical infrastructure that was being targeted by the Iranians. That is because the Iranians were targeting it in Israel. But the problem is, global companies who had that equipment in their critical infrastructure systems were also targeted tangentially, because they had Israeli equipment in their systems. And so we sent that alert out before, because we saw that here in the homeland. And obviously, any threat towards critical infrastructure, as I said, is a big concern. So we haven't seen a big shift, but we have seen some attempts to hit critical infrastructure as a result of that war. To what extent do you think warfare will be restricted to the cyber realm? What would be the tipping point for cyber conflict to escalate into actual armed conflict? Yeah, so I think right now it really is focused. It's what we call the gray zone. They are operating just below, in some cases, what would precipitate a kinetic response. What do I think the tipping point would be to go into more of actual armed conflict? That's a decision maker, standpoint. That is the National Security Council, and ultimately the president and the military's decision. I have to imagine that when you endanger or you actually take the life of U.S. civilians or members of the U.S. military, or take some sort of action that actually causes damage to military command and control, those are areas where you would likely see decision makers start to talk about the potential of armed conflict. So I think anything, like I said, life and safety, or that would have military impairment would likely result in that. Anything that we would look at is acting outside the norms of cyberspace operations, if you can define it that way. All right. The next question is, with so much innovation like autonomous cars, robots, etc., how is the FBI or government put in place some type of switch that would turn off the unit, as they are weapons that can be used to harm anyone? Well, there's regulation. So certainly when it comes to, aviation, automotive, transportation in general, there's regulation that requires folks to do certain things to mitigate risk to the broader sector and to those who are using the services of the sector. That's really not an FBI purview to have what would, broadly be, I guess, called a kill switch within those technologies. But when it comes to autonomous vehicles and the use of artificial intelligence in those devices, that's a concern that I think industry has to look at, regulators have to look at, and certainly the White House and other decision makers would have to look at as well. At some point, you're going to have the capability, I would think, to want to intervene where you can, where a threat actor starts to target, those critical systems. I think of my discussions a few years back with the aviation sector, and if you look at, for example, an Airbus A380, one of the largest aircraft in civilian air fleets, takes over 500 people across the globe. It has over, I think, 1,200 unique pieces of software and firmware that run that aircraft. And so I cannot imagine the difficulty in ensuring that you're securing all of that software in order to protect the people both on the aircraft and below the aircraft. So that's the world we're moving in, is where you have to start to look to secure every aspect of every piece of software and every piece of hardware that is now running these systems, these vehicles, and these technologies. Because you have actors like Iran who are willing to exploit those technologies. And Iran tends to be a lot less judicious in their exploitation, a lot less cautious in their exploitation than some others, meaning they have more capacity to cause damage, intentionally or not intentionally, when they're dabbling in the space. And even an unintentional change to something like an autonomous vehicle or an aircraft that causes, again, some sort of life safety impact could quickly escalate beyond the gray zone into more kinetic effects, and that's a concern. The good news when it comes to cyber operations with Iran is, and I will say this, I know a lot of folks here think I'm probably partial and jaded, but I am. The United States has tremendous capability to overcome Iran leveraging cyber operations. We have far more people who are far more technically capable. Our innovation is way ahead of Iran. And so to that extent that Iran is going to conduct cyber operations against us, there is a sense of mutually assured destruction, meaning if they hit us, they know that we can hit them back, and we can hit them back a lot harder than what they can. And so, continuing to compete in this space is important, because it does act as a deterrent as well to some of these nation states who are much more bold in their cyber operations. What other questions can I answer for you guys? I'm going to take a break and just get a drink here.
A.B. Leatherman, I do have a question for you. What really makes the Iranian threat different from any of the other nation threats that the FBI investigates?
Yeah, thanks. What makes the Iran threat different? There's a couple things. Number one, their military units that are conducting these operations treat it a lot differently than what other military units do, meaning they treat it like an act of military, like a military function in how they conduct cyber operations. Treating it like a military function means much more potential for destructive capability. You're developing tools that have destructive capability, where other nation states are looking primarily at espionage. their espionage tools have some sort of capacity to also impact in a destructive way as well. So their tools are also not as well put together as some other countries' tools. And what that means is vulnerabilities in how they deploy their tools that could have impact outside its intended use. And then they're probably the only nation state that we've seen leveraging cyber for what I talked about earlier, which was lethal plotting against individuals, against dissidents, against those who speak out against the regime. You know, we all know how they treat folks within the confines of Iran, within the country itself, within the boundaries, who speak out against the regime. They lose the ability to do the same with dissidents outside the country. And so they devised specific lines of effort to identify those individuals in the United States and abroad in order to collect on them and potentially, again, leverage lethal plotting. That is very unique to Iran in informing its more kinetic activity. Can you share specific case studies where the FBI, in collaboration with international partners, successfully disrupted Iranian cyber operations or influence campaigns? I mentioned one, which was in the fall, related to the Iranian hack and leak operations, both the indictments as well as sanctions and some other things that we were able to release to deter the actors. We were able to tip, a hospital to the activity and disrupt that activity as well. We were able to indict some Iranian actors who, several years back, who were targeting financial institutions, leveraging DDoS attacks, basically taking down financial sector websites and some of their online banking platforms. We were able to identify who those actors were, indict them, publicly out them, and provide mitigations to the financial sector as a result of that. I talked about deterrence through defense. Earlier last year, we held a significant outreach campaigns to critical infrastructure to highlight the Iranians' targeting of those Israeli devices, and then how industry could remove that capability of the Iranians to use those devices. So disruption campaigns take on all different forms. Sometimes they take on those cyber operations that involve very technical acts, and sometimes they take on indictments, sanctions, and sometimes they take on a defensive focus. But those are some of the areas that we have targeted to mitigate the Iran threat. What role does private sector cooperation play in detecting and mitigating Iranian cyber-enabled influence operations, and how can these partnerships be strengthened? Well, the private sector owns and operates the social media platforms, not the U.S. government. And when it comes to influence operations specifically, you look at the major providers, and they have terms of service violations that they look at conducting against these actors. In fact, I think some of these social media companies have put out tremendously helpful reports that show exactly what state actors are doing to influence global populations. And I think that has been helpful because you're not just hearing it from the government at that point, you're also hearing it from very capable industry partners. So they play a key part because the FBI can't listen. The United States government has got to respect the Constitution and First Amendment rights. So we can't even predicate an investigation unless we're able to say with reasonable certainty, that there is foreign actor use of this to engage in some sort of effect. That is not as easily done as what a lot of people think. So industry has an incredibly important part it tamping some of this down or removing some of this capability where the government cannot come in and potentially risk curbing U.S. persons' use of these kind of platforms. How does the FBI balance the need for rapid response to cyber threats with the legal and diplomatic complexities involved in attributing attacks to nation states like Iran? Balance the need for rapid response. Okay. We're nimble. I think that's a big benefit for being a law enforcement agency is we can, with judicial oversight, we can serve what we call Rule 41 search warrants in order to seize code that the actors may be using and remove that capability from them. So the law enforcement authorities we have allow us to be very quick, and we don't always have to attribute the activity right away. We can seize the code, we can seize the malicious capability, we can seize the infrastructure, we can continue to conduct our investigation, and we can attribute the activity at a later date. And so we're always trying to balance getting attribution right with always acting quickly to support victims and provide them with the ability to prevent or detect the adversary as quickly as possible. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea work together as cyber threat actors under the uniting motive of seeking revenge on the West, but I imagine there is a limit on how much they can share with each other, and there is mutual distrust. To what extent do they share capabilities and tools? Have there ever been instances of them turning on each other? They do share capabilities and tools. I would say they do not share the best capability and tools that they have because they each want to reserve the best tools for their own use. But when there are mutual targets of interest or mutual cyber campaigns that better align with their overall objectives, they'll use those tools together in order to have greater impact. And we have seen instances where they do turn on each other as well. Looking ahead, what emerging technologies or strategies do you believe Iran is likely leveraging in future cyber operations, and how is the FBI preparing to counter those threats? Yeah, we've talked about artificial intelligence, and I would say everybody is looking at quantum computing, the ability to decrypt data that is not available today, because that has not just the ability to decrypt for intelligence purposes, but also to decrypt in support of like cyber network attacks on infrastructure. Increasingly, we use secure communications to remotely access network devices, meaning an administrator sitting in Washington, D.C. can connect to a device in Idaho and manipulate key controls. That connectivity is protected through encryption. If you're able to leverage quantum to circumvent that encryption, now you're able to gain remote control of those devices. When you start to think about nuclear energy, when you start to think about command and control of the U.S. military, those are applications where quantum computing could have tremendous negative impact on our ability to continue to defend ourselves. And so those are probably the primary emerging areas that we see lots of risk. Are the Iranian cyber operations often mixed with info operations? Yes. Often you see, anytime you get information, a lot of times that happens through hacking activity, and that hacking activity happens as a result of those intelligence services, targeting key information that they can then leak later in order to influence global populations. What type of bait to counteract and capture foreign actors the FBI utilizes? Maybe fake AI sites to lure them in. Well, I won't get into the details because I don't want to disclose that publicly, but the FBI does have capability to conduct online undercover operations in order to collect information that we can't as a law enforcement agency if bad nation states or bad people know that they're actually talking to or engaging with FBI infrastructure. So we leverage online covert platforms that let us do that. We certainly engage with those in the hacking ecosystem who are aware of cyber actors. We might not be aware of them. We might not have information as to where they actually sit or what technologies they use, but there are those who work in that sector who provide us unique insight and information that we couldn't otherwise get. That allow us to pursue law enforcement action against those targets. So we are always looking for opportunities, through those undercover operations or through those sources that allow us to get access to actors that we couldn't otherwise get, or intelligence that we couldn't otherwise get. How do you think Iranian cyber ops compare to North Korea, Russia, or even Chinese ones? Let me give you an analogy. If I had gone to a foreign country and I was staying in a really nice hotel, and I left that hotel room and I left my sensitive documents on the desk in the hotel room, And when I came back, Chinese PRC, CCP based actors had come in there. I would notice there was very little changes in the papers themselves. That's because the operational security that the Chinese take when it comes to cyber is incredibly important to them and very sophisticated. So I might not even know that the actors were there. If I come back to the hotel room and the information is gone and it's not there for me anymore, and the actors don't care that to know that I have found out about it, it's likely the Russians, because the Russians themselves just they're all good with taking the information and in some cases letting us know that they were there. If they were Iranian actors, I would come back to the hotel room, the information would be gone, and there would be spray paint all over the walls because there is a destructive nature to what they do. They might be able to get in. There's very little operational security with what they do often because they're just not as sophisticated as the other nation states. And often they want to leave some sort of mark behind to let you know that they were there or they destroyed something in the process. And so that tends to be those actors. If it's the DPRK, I would come back to the hotel and the hotel would be burned down, I think, at that point. So they just tend to go high and right on us on a regular basis. This is all just Brett Leatherman's observations, not that of the FBI. Okay, is the FBI observing evidence of cooperation or operational overlap between threat actors linked to the IRGC and those aligned with the MOIS in conducting cyber operations? That's a space I can't get into too much detail, but I can say that much like the FBI cooperates with CIA, we don't even cooperate. We embed our folks with our intelligence community partners so that there's no light of day between us. Much like we do that, we believe that the IRGC, the Military Intelligence Service, likely worked very cooperatively with the MOIS to conduct cyber operations. That is because they take a whole of government approach to conducting CNO, cyber network operations, because they know they have a lot of room to make up when it comes to offensive cyber operations. So I can't get into detail there, but I think we should all be comfortable with the fact that they likely work together and take a best athlete approach when it comes to hacking. All right, last question I think is, you mentioned AI. Yesterday, the first known AI-powered ransomware, Prompt Lock, was publicly revealed. How will that change the whole landscape of cyber attacks, and how are we will adapt to them? Well, offensive use of artificial intelligence, like what we saw with Prompt Lock, is going to require defensive use of artificial intelligence as well. There is no way that we have the tech talent right now to scale our cyber defenses. We already have a tech talent deficit to scale our cyber defenses for what artificial intelligence will bring to the offensive cyberspace. But I am very optimistic that very responsible AI development companies are bringing tools and technologies in place that will help industry protect against those kind of offensive artificial intelligence operations, like AI-based malware and ransomware. So defending against those kind of technologies is important in the AI space, but also defending against IRGC and MOIS actions is equally important for us, because a U.S. private sector company or a piece of critical infrastructure cannot protect itself against a foreign nation state all the time, that is well funded, well resourced. And that's why we have to leverage partnerships in government, in industry, and artificial intelligence in order to scale our defenses to protect the homeland against those kinds of attacks.
A.D. Leatherman, I know you are going from meeting to meeting. That was extremely interesting and informative and such a timely topic. I know you got to run to another meeting, but we can't thank you enough. We could go on forever, right, asking questions. So thank you so much. I just want to tell everybody that this webinar will be posted on our website and then up to the YouTube channel here in a little bit. And I invite everybody to check out our website, extremism.gwu.edu. For more information about our program, our Iranian report, and all our other research. Again, A.D. Leatherman, thank you for everything that you do and keeping us safe. We appreciate that. I hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks, everyone.